Hello? My name is Luna. I wasn't born with a silver spoon. Nor did I grow up with holiday cards on the fridge or piano recitals on weekends. I was raised in a rust-stained town in southern Ohio called Rustwood, where the scent of iron hung in the air and dreams often stopped at the edge of the highway. My story doesn't start with victory. It starts with dirt, with shame, with a pair of calloused hands that fed me, clothed me, and gave me everything except the one thing I didn't know I needed at the time: pride in where I came from. My dad, his name's Rick Holloway, was a janitor at Rustwood High for over 20 years. You've probably never seen a man more loyal to a mop and a wax buffer machine. Every morning, at 4:30 a.m., before the town even yawned, he was already up, brewing black coffee in a chipped thermos and pulling on the same navy blue uniform with his name stitched in cursive over the chest. He raised me alone. My mom walked out when I was 6. I remember the night clearly, her red suitcase by the door, her lipstick half smeared on a cigarette, and me hiding behind the kitchen counter hoping she'd change her mind. She never did. From that day forward, Dad became everything. My ride to school, my nightly reader, my broken lunch money piggy bank. He never complained. Not once. He worked double shifts when I got braces, sold his old Chevy to pay for my clarinet lessons, missed 3 of his own doctor appointments just to sit in on my parent-teacher conferences. I never realized what it took for him to do that. I used to resent his smell, always faintly like bleach and floor wax, when he hugged me after work. I'd wrinkle minnows, too young and too foolish to understand that the scent I was rejecting was the very reason I had food on the table and clothes that fit. In a town like Rustwood, ambition isn't a virtue, it's an escape plan. I was always the smart girl, the one teachers whispered about in the hallway, saying things like, "She's got real potential," or "She'll make it out of here." Dad believed in that more than anyone. He pinned my spelling bee ribbons on the wall next to his service certificates. He packed my lunches with little sticky notes that said things like, "Holloways don't quit" or "Make today count." Sometimes I'd roll my eyes, but sometimes I'd smile, quietly, like I knew something he didn't. The day I got my acceptance letter to UCLA was the day he cried. Not a heavy sob, just one tear that slipped down the side of his sunburnt face as he held the letter in his rough hands. He read it aloud. Twice. Just to make sure he wasn't dreaming. I was going to California. Away from Rustwood. Away from mop buckets and discount grocery stores. Away from the creaky porch steps and the water heater that groaned like a dying bear. I promised myself I'd become someone new. Someone polished. Sophisticated. I would finally shed the small-town skin that clung to me like smoke from the paper mill. But in that promise, I planted a seed of quiet betrayal. I didn't know it yet, but I was beginning to bury the very roots that had kept me alive all those years. My dad offered to drive me across the country in his beat-up pickup truck. He saved for months cutting coupons, working weekends, even skipping his birthday dinner just to afford gas and motel stays. I let him, because deep down, I thought I was giving him a chance to be part of something big. But I also started to worry about how he'd look in front of the other families at orientation, about the stains on his work shirt, the worn-out boots, the way he still used paper maps instead of a GPS. I told myself it wasn't shame, that I just wanted him to rest, that it was better if he dropped me off quietly and didn't stick around too long. But the truth was much simpler and much uglier. I was afraid he didn't belong in the world I was trying to enter, and that fear, that seed I planted, it was about to grow into the deepest regret of my life. We pulled into the UCLA campus just after sunrise. The air smelled different, cleaner, crisper, like ambition had its own scent in Los Angeles. Palms lined the wide roads, and students in hoodies and headphones zipped past on skateboards. Everything felt alive, fast, and full of possibility. Dad parked his truck in a visitor's lot near the dorms. It looked embarrassingly out of place, dusty, rust-eaten, with a muffler that coughed like it had asthma, next to luxury SUVs and gleaming Teslas. It was a relic, a reminder of the life I had just left behind. He hopped out in his usual janitor uniform, boots scuffed, shirt tucked in too tight, hat tilted awkwardly on his head to shield from the California sun. He reached into the back seat, pulled out my duffel bag, and handed it to me like he was handing over a piece of his heart. "You ready, superstar?" he asked, smiling that crooked smile of his. I nodded. But I couldn't meet his eyes. I could feel them before I saw them, other students and parents glancing our way. Some with curiosity, others with quiet judgment. A girl in designer sunglasses whispered something to her mother and glanced at Dad. I caught it. The half-smirk, the subtle look of amusement. And in that moment, I did something I will carry with me for the rest of my life. When a group of students walked by and one of them casually asked, "Is that your dad?" I hesitated. Then I laughed lightly and said, "Oh no, he's just helping me move in." I saw his face. How it froze for just a moment, like he wasn't sure what he had just heard. Then he chuckled soft, unsure, and nodded along, like maybe he had misheard. Or maybe, deep down, he understood. He didn't say another word. We brought my things into the dorm. I was too busy looking at other families, comparing mine to theirs. Dads in polos, moms in sundresses, brothers taking selfies. I imagined how they'd never know the sour sting of cleaning chemicals or the humiliation of having to patch jeans instead of buying new ones. They looked like the future. I still felt like the past. As we walked back out, Dad paused at the door. "This is a big step, Luna," he said. "Don't let anyone tell you you're not enough." I nodded again, still not meeting his eyes. He reached out to hug me. I stepped back and said, "People are watching." He lowered his arm. "Right," he said quietly. "Of course." And then he walked away. I watched his figure grow smaller as he crossed the parking lot. The back of his shirt was damp with sweat. The sun bounced off the truck's windshield as he climbed in. He sat there for a while, maybe waiting to see if I'd look back. I didn't. I told myself I was just overwhelmed, that I needed space, that I'd call him later and explain. But I didn't. Days passed, then weeks. Each time he texted, I answered shorter and shorter. When he called, I'd let it ring and tell myself I was studying. In reality, I was building a new identity, one brick at a time. In a world where I thought he didn't fit. What I didn't know was that while I was trying so hard to become someone new, I was slowly erasing the one person who had always believed in me, loved me without conditions. And then one day, after midterms, I opened a letter in my mailbox. It was from Dad. There was no return address, just my name, scribbled in his familiar uneven handwriting. Inside, it said, I hope you're doing okay. Luna, I miss you every day. I know I probably embarrassed you. That's all right. I just wanted you to know, no matter how far you go, I'll always be proud of you. You were never meant to stay small. Love. Dad. I cried harder than I had in years. Not because he was wrong, but because he had always been right. By the time senior year rolled around, I had everything I once thought mattered. A 3.9 GPA. An internship offer from a top consulting firm in San Francisco. A boyfriend from Boston who wore loafers without socks and talked about startups at dinner parties. I had traded the smell of bleach and wet floors for almond lattes and rooftop views. On paper, I was winning. But inside, Something felt cracked. Every time I achieved something, I wanted to tell him. Every time I hit a wall, I wanted to hear his voice. His laugh. That stupid, comforting line he always used when I panicked. Don't worry, Luna. It's just life trying to test your brilliance. But I hadn't seen him in nearly 4 years. After that letter, I wrote back once. A short, awkward note about school being busy. He didn't reply. Maybe he felt I had made my choice. And maybe I had. Graduation day came on a bright May morning. UCLA's campus was covered in blue and gold. Families spilled across the lawn. Waving signs and flowers, mothers wiped tears behind sunglasses. Fathers wore suits that didn't quite fit, looking proud and overwhelmed. I wore my cap and gown. My name was printed in the program under honors. I had earned everything I came here for. Everything but him? I looked around, scanning the rows of chairs behind the graduate section. For a second, I let myself imagine he'd show up. Maybe he'd be there, in that old janitor uniform, clutching a bouquet of corner store flowers. Maybe he'd wave at me like he did back in elementary school when I sang off-key at school recitals. But there was no one. Just an empty seat near the back, with a perfect view of the stage. That's when it hit me, not like a gentle breeze, but like a sudden, sharp wind that steals your breath. The one person who deserved to be here the most wasn't, because I had pushed him out. After the ceremony, cameras flashed. Friends hugged. Families swarmed around their graduates. My classmates posed with parents who wore sunglasses and grins. One dad carried his daughter on his shoulders. Another mom kissed her son's forehead and cried openly. I stood alone under the jacaranda tree near the main quad. A professor came by and congratulated me. He called me one of the brightest he'd seen in years. I smiled and thanked him. But my voice cracked. I left early, walked back to my dorm and sat on my twin bed, still in my gown. The diploma lay on the desk. I didn't even want to touch it. Later that night, while everyone else went to parties or dinners, I went online and booked a flight home. For the first time in 4 years, I was going back to Arkansas. I didn't care about the job offer or the apartment lease. I didn't care that I might look like I was giving up. I just knew I couldn't move forward until I faced the silence I had created. When I landed, I took a cab straight to our old house. But the porch light was off. The yard overgrown. A for sale sign leaned crookedly against the mailbox. Panic set in. I called the neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, who used to bring us banana bread on Sundays. She answered on the 3rd ring. Luna, oh sweetie. I wasn't sure I'd ever hear your voice again. I asked her where Dad was. She sighed. He moved out a year ago. Sold the house after he retired. Said there wasn't much reason to stay. Do you know where he went? There was a pause. Then she said, he took a job cleaning at the elementary school in town. Said he liked hearing the sound of kids laughing. Said it reminded him of when you were little. I thanked her and hung up. Then I sat down on the porch steps of the house I once called home. I looked out over the street where I learned to ride a bike, where he had chased after me with his arms wide open, cheering every fall like it was a victory. And for the first time in years, I said it out loud. I'm sorry, Dad. And the silence answered. The next morning, I went to the elementary school. The building looked smaller than I remembered, like the walls had shrunk over time. The mural on the side, cartoon animals and children holding hands, had faded, but the laughter echoing from the playground was exactly the same. I waited by the side entrance. Just as recess was ending, kids streamed inside in messy lines, dragging their backpacks and half-finished conversations behind them. Then I saw him. He He was pushing a yellow mop bucket down the hallway, wearing the same scuffed brown shoes he used to wear when I was a kid. His back was slightly hunched, and his hair had gone fully gray. But I knew. I didn't need to see his face. That was my father. My throat clenched. I couldn't move. He turned the corner, saw me and froze. For a moment, we just stared at each other. Then he blinked, like he wasn't sure I was real. "Luna," he said, voice soft. I nodded. His eyes searched my face. There was no anger, no bitterness, just surprise, and maybe a little hope. I stepped forward. My voice broke. "I came home." He smiled gently. "I can see that." We stood in silence for a beat longer, until he pointed awkwardly at his mop. I was just finishing the hallway. The principal doesn't like streaks." I almost laughed. That was so him. "I'll wait," I said. He nodded, finished the last few strokes, and wheeled the bucket into the janitor's closet. Then we walked out to the back steps of the school and sat down side by side like nothing had happened and everything had happened. "I saw your graduation online," he said. "They posted clips on YouTube." I looked down. "You should have been there." He shrugged. "Didn't think you wanted me there?" The words hit like a slap. Not because they were cruel, but because they were true. I was ashamed. I whispered, "I know." I turned to him, eyes stinging. "I wasn't ashamed of you. I was ashamed of me for caring so much what other people thought." He looked away, then back again. "You were just trying to find your place in a world that makes it hard for people like us." That sentence cracked something open inside me. All this time, I thought he didn't understand. But he did. He always did. "I made you feel like you weren't enough." I said, "But you were more than enough. You were my whole foundation. Everything I've built, every step I climbed was because you cleaned the floor first." He stared at me, unmoving. Then slowly, his eyes filled, and he said, "That's all I ever wanted to hear." I leaned my head on his shoulder. It smelled like bleach and soap and sun. But to me, it smelled like home. We sat there for a long time. He told me about the kids at the school, how one of them reminded him of me, bossy and bright and always asking questions. I told him I had turned down the job in San Francisco. He didn't judge me. He didn't ask why. He just nodded like he understood. "I think I want to do something that matters." I said, "You always did." He replied, when the bell rang and the halls filled with laughter again. He stood up and brushed off his pants. "I gotta get back to work," he said. "Lunchroom floor gets real messy after Taco Tuesday." I stood with him. "Can I help?" He raised an eyebrow. "You want a mop?" I smiled. "I think it's about time I learned how." He handed me a second mop from the closet, and together we went to clean the lunchroom floor. I don't know what those kids thought when they saw me mopping alongside the janitor. Maybe they laughed. Maybe they didn't notice. But I noticed. That afternoon, scrubbing ketchup off tile next to the man who gave me everything, I felt proud for the first time in years. Not because I had succeeded, but because I had come home. The months that followed weren't dramatic. There was no movie-style makeover. No grand announcements. Life just slowed down. I took a job at the local library part-time. Quiet, but enough. I helped kids pick out books, organize the shelves, and sometimes read stories during afternoon sessions. People in town started recognizing me, not as the girl who ran off to New York, but as Luna. Just Luna. That felt good. And every Thursday after school, I met my dad for lunch. Sometimes we sat on the park bench near the old Veterans Memorial. Sometimes we ate in the school cafeteria, surrounded by crinkling chip bags and plastic trays. But no matter where we were, it became a ritual, our space to just be. I asked questions I had never dared to ask. Did you ever want something more? Did you ever regret staying here? Did you ever hate that I left and every time? He answered with such honesty. It disarmed me. I had you. That was enough. One day, I brought an old photo album. Inside were faded pictures me in a second-hand Halloween costume. I me him asleep in the living room with a wrench still in hand. There is us at the beach that one summer he could afford to take a day off. He laughed and pointed at the one where I was sitting on his shoulders. You were so bossy. I should have charged you rent. I grinned. I should have paid you royalties. But then I found a photo I had never seen before. It was him much younger. Maybe late 20s, wearing a crisp collared shirt, standing next to a truck with a big logo that said Crescent Water Systems. Is this when you first started plumbing? He nodded slowly. First job. I thought I was going to make it big. Open a business. Hire guys. Maybe even build homes. What happened? He paused. Life. He didn't sound sad. Just real. That was the thing about him. He never lied to make me feel better. But somehow, the truth he told always left me feeling stronger. A few weeks later, the town invited him to speak at the school's career day. They had asked him for years, but he always said no. This time, he said, yes, if I would come with him. So there we were, standing in front of a classroom of fifth graders. He wore a clean uniform shirt and polished his shoes the night before. I wore jeans and a sweater. When it was his turn to speak, he cleared his throat and held up a wrench. I'm a plumber, he said. But really, I'm a problem solver. The kids laughed. One of them asked if he'd ever fallen into a sewer. He said yes. Once. And that story bought him instant fame among the 10-year-olds. Then he turned serious. I fix things for people. Pipes. Water lines. Heaters. I show up when something's wrong. And I try to make it right. That's the job. But you know what I'm most proud of? He looked at me. This one right here. Every eye turned to me. My throat tightened. She's the smartest person I know, he said. And I didn't give her much. But I gave her everything I had. And now, she's teaching me things too. There wasn't a sound in that room. Afterward, a little girl tugged my sleeve and asked if my dad was famous. In our house. I said, he's the most famous man alive. That night, back at our apartment, he fell asleep in the recliner watching a documentary about bridges. I sat on the couch and watched him breathe. The slow, steady rhythm of a man who had spent his whole life lifting others. And I thought about something I wish someone had told me when I was younger. Success doesn't always look like bright lights and magazine covers. Sometimes, it looks like showing up every single day. Sometimes, it looks like keeping the heat on. Sometimes, it looks like loving someone so much. You let them forget you, just so they can fly. I used to think my biggest mistake was leaving. But really, it was not seeing the miracle I was born into. My father never asked to be honored. He never wanted applause. But he deserved it. Quietly. Completely. Endlessly. And so do a million others working behind the curtain. Mopping the floor. Holding the light for someone else. So if you're listening, maybe you've been there. Maybe you've been the one who left. Or the one left behind. Either way, I hope you'll remember this. Never measure someone's worth by the shine of their shoes. Because sometimes, the dirtiest shoes belong to the cleanest hearts. And sometimes, the most ordinary people carry the most extraordinary love. 3 weeks after career day. I got a call from Mrs. Whitmore, the school counselor. She asked if I could stop by. She said some of the 5th graders had written letters to my dad. When I showed up, she handed me a small box with colorful envelopes, all sealed with messy tape or smudged glue. I took them home and placed the box on the kitchen table, waiting for Dad to get back from a job. That evening, he came in, boots muddy, shirt half untucked, and said the furnace at the Sanders house had nearly blown out. I told him there was something for him on the table. He looked at the box like it was ticking. Letters, he said, raising an eyebrow. What? They write complaints. Just read them. I laughed. So I did. One by one. He opened those little envelopes. Dear Mr. Luna's dad, I want to be like you when I grow up, because you fix things, and you're not boring like my uncle. Dear Mr. Tom, thank you for being nice and funny. My house had no water once, and I cried. You help kids not cry. Dear Mr. Luna's father, you looked proud. I want my dad to look proud too. He didn't say much as he read, just nodded occasionally. Lips pressed together. When he finished, he stacked them neatly and slid the box back toward me. Then he said something I didn't expect. I want to write one too. To who, I asked? He looked down at his calloused hands. To you. The next morning, I found a folded sheet of lined paper on my nightstand. It was written in his slow, square handwriting. Luna. I never said it the way you probably needed. I didn't know how. My own dad barely looked at me, let alone told me he was proud. I thought showing up was enough. Maybe it was. Maybe it wasn't. But when you left for New York, I didn't feel angry. I felt scared. Not because you failed, but because I thought maybe I failed you. Maybe you ran so far because I didn't give you enough reasons to stay. But then you came back. Not just to visit. You returned. That's different. That's braver. Some people chase dreams to escape who they are, but you faced it head on. You walked into the mess and sat down with it. That's strength. I don't know if I gave you much in this life, but I see now. You gave me something. You gave me someone to believe in. So, thank you. Luna. Not just for being my daughter, but for letting me be your dad. Love. Tom. I read that letter over and over until the words felt stitched into my skin. That weekend, I did something I had been putting off. I wrote to my old mentor in New York, the woman who told me I wasn't cut out for success. I didn't write to argue. I wrote to thank her. Because sometimes, rejection becomes the mirror we finally break, so we can see ourselves clearly again. I told her about the library, about the kids, about my dad, and I ended the letter with this. You were right. I didn't belong in that world. But not because I wasn't good enough, because I had a different kind of work to do. And now, I'm finally doing it. Then I folded the letter, addressed it, and walked it down to the mailbox with my dad. We didn't speak, just stood there for a moment as I dropped it in. And then he said, real soft. You good? I nodded. Yeah, I'm good. Because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't chasing or hiding. I was just living. Fully. Quietly. Honestly. Sometimes, the redemption arc isn't loud. Sometimes, it's a handwritten letter. Sometimes, it's an afternoon with kids and a wrench. And sometimes, it's a moment when you realize the life you were meant to live isn't out there. It's here. It's now. It's home.